Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Rogue Agent Answers. My name is the Rogue Agent. Some people call me David Lewis, and every week I answer one of the many life insurance related questions that I've received from clients, from email subscribers on the daily email list, questions floated to me from across the interwebs, in the comments sections, which I know you're not supposed to read, or just interactions that I've had with people in real life over the past 20 years, which is a long time. And some of these questions I just scribble down on scrap pieces of paper. Some of these are stuff I've written down on my phone. Some of it is on Post-it notes scattered all over the office. And every week I answer one of those questions. So if you'd like to ask your question, drop them in the comments section or join my email list for more life insurance tips and advice at monogenics.com. monegenics.com. Also, keep in mind that nothing in this podcast is or should be construed as financial, investment, legal, or tax advice. In fact, nothing that I say in this podcast should be construed even as insurance advice, as I don't give individual advice blanket just across the internet unqualified to random strangers. So if you need any of that stuff, contact a licensed professional that you know, like, and trust, preferably someone licensed in your jurisdiction. And now for this week's question. Would you ever recommend I buy an IUL policy? Well, it depends on what you want out of the policy, really. So in a previous episode, I think it was episode 27. I went kind of deep into how indexed universal life insurance works. So if you want some kind of a background on that, check out episode 27. But basically, like whether or not you should buy an IUL really depends on kind of what you want out of your policy. So IUL is a trend product. It's designed to work under very specific economic conditions, and those economic conditions are conditions that essentially will mirror. And historically, they were the conditions that arose out of the 2008 financial crisis, and after 2008, 2009, it got really it existed before then, but it really started to ramp up after then. Like in the 2010s, it really started to ramp up in popularity, and carriers started getting really, really creative with different kinds of designs and different crediting methodologies and just different different mechanics that they were introducing in the policies. And more and more carriers started selling IUL after that too. VUL was kind of on its way out for obvious reasons. In case anybody doesn't remember, 2008 was when financial markets basically went into meltdown. The housing market went into meltdown. It was a crazy time. If you lived through it, you know what I mean. If you haven't lived through it, you probably wouldn't believe the stuff that was going on at that time. So carriers were really interested in designing and really promoting a product that was going to be very, very different. And essentially the message was you can get the upside potential of the stock market without any of the downside risk. Now, in the context of the 2008 market crash, that became a very, very attractive and very powerful marketing message. And not surprisingly, those products took off and they sold like hotcakes, as they say. So that's the background context for this product. Now, you could argue that product made sense then and it worked really well. And for about 10 or 15 years, it's gone and done fairly well. And especially it did pretty well. It did fairly well during that really long bull market. Because if you had been invested directly in the S&P, you would have done better. But if you were kind of risk averse, and you bought the IUL, you did still very well because you basically hit the cap every year. And so you got kind of the max crediting that you would have gotten out of that policy. The insurance company made its money and the policyholders made their money and everybody was happy. Agent made his money. Everyone was happy. Now it's a different story. So interest rates have kind of reversed. So, and of course, we also had really low interest rates back then. So carriers had built up a kind of a stockpile of cash, and they were making enough money, and they had made enough money in the past that they could have, in the options market, the way the options pricing was, and because there was so little demand at the very beginning for these products, and it was sort of like demand is ramping up, and in the very early days of this, the demand had not peaked yet. So the competition really hadn't heated up yet. So the products all looked really, really good. And so what happened was, these things, were selling left and right and center. So today it's a different story, because over time what happened is the carriers kind of spent all their money on these strategies, and as interest rates rose, you'd think it would kind of help that out, because now there's more excess interest and whatnot. But they still, just the way that the way carriers, the way that insurance companies manage their portfolios, they use what's called the portfolio crediting method. So they're blending interest rates across decades. They're not using new money rates. So if current interest rates are 5%, that's not what the carrier's earning on its portfolio overall. It's got bonds that are still paying, close to 0%. And so the newer rates are blending in with those older rates, and it takes a long time to drag and pull that portfolio rate back up. So carriers sort of were running into a situation where the cost of the options was going up, and the options budget was being strained. It's getting harder and harder to implement this indexing strategy properly. And so cap rates start to come down. They can't really afford a high cap rate anymore, because the options budget just isn't there anymore. And so the products look less and less attractive. And so when I started in this business, cap rates were at 16%. In fact, I kept an old illustration from Aviva, and looking back on it, the cap rate was 16%. Wild. Today, you're talking about cap rates of maybe 8 or 9% or something like that. So the cap rates don't look quite as attractive as they did in the past. But even still, even if the cap rates are like 8 or 9% or 7% even, the issue with the product is this. So carriers most of the carriers are using a bull call spread. Some of them are using variations on that. If they have like uncapped strategies, they may use something different, but it's the same basic idea. And so on these option strategies, there is especially for the bull call spread. So the long-term trend, the expected profit long-term on an at-the-money bull call spread trends down toward zero. And so on the option side, you should expect the product, again, over time. It doesn't mean like this year or next year or not, but over time you should expect the product to become less and less and less profitable. And so if it does become more profitable, then great, that's gravy. And you're going to be very, very happy. But the expectation is that the profits are not going to be, 8, 9, 10, 12%. It's, 4, 5, 6%, maybe 7%, maybe. So that's on an IUL, if the agent is illustrating it at 7%, have him illustrate it at 5%. Okay, if it can survive at 5%, if it can thrive at 5%, you're going to be fine. If you have the agent run it at like a 3% interest crediting and a 4% interest crediting. If it crashes at the 3 or 4%, and you see on the non-guaranteed column, and the thing just crashes and lapses, you have a structural problem in the policy. If you need a higher rate of return in order for the product to work, there's a potential problem down the road. And if the crediting rates start to drop, then that is going to be your signal that something is going to happen to the policy in the future, or could potentially, I would say it could potentially happen in the future. So, right now, the IULs illustrate very competitively against a really good participating whole life product. Not exactly the same. A lot of companies will try to illustrate it a little higher, make it look a little bit better, but they illustrate comparable to a whole life product, a good participating whole life product. So in order, in my mind, to justify the extra risk, because there is extra risk in an IUL because it's a planned premium, there's fewer guarantees. You kind of strip out some of the guarantees, whole life, and then you end up with a UL because it's all assumption driven. There's no guaranteed premium, there's no guaranteed net cash value, there's no guaranteed net death benefit. It's all planned premium and assumed cash value and assumed death benefit. So in order to take the extra risk of not having those extra guarantees built in, you really want, outsized returns. You want to, you have to judge this for yourself. Like every policyholder has to kind of think about like how much more is this worth? Is it worth the risk to get, 50 basis points, 100 basis points more, or do you want like 200, 300, 400 basis points? If it's a difference between whole life earning 4 or 5% and IUL earning 8, 9%, then, maybe the risk makes sense. And that would be like, oh, you could justify that, right? But if the difference between whole life and IUL in the future is like 50 basis points, and it's like, I could earn 5% on my whole life and I earn 5.5% on my IUL. You took a lot of, you took more risk to earn about the same return. So that didn't really make a lot of sense. And that's kind of where I think about IULs, is that it's not the product that it's typically advertised as. It's not like a kind of investment kind of thing. It's really a fixed life insurance product with the theoretical potential that it could earn more than a whole life product. Doesn't mean it will, but it's a theoretical just based on like the mechanics of how the thing is supposed to work. It doesn't mean that will actually play out in practice. That's the gamble. The gamble is that you're taking is that the thing will, that the mechanics will work out in your favor, and long term you're going to beat whole life, and you're not competing against variable life, and you're not competing against a direct investment in the stock market, because that's not how the product is designed, and that's not how it's going to perform. And if you're expecting it to perform that way, you're going to be very disappointed, because that's not at all how these things work. So, and there's agents who will argue this, tooth and nail, and they'll say, no, this is that. I've seen some agents say this will perform better than an investment, and it, to me, I don't know how they can say that honestly, right? So you kind of have to set your expectations. In my mind, in my heretical opinion, you sort of look at this like this is a fixed life insurance product. It's an alternative to buying whole life insurance. And what you really hope to get out of this is maybe some additional interest credits at some point in the future. But if it's my money, if I'm talking about my money or anything I'm recommending to clients, if you want the risk of an investment, buy an investment. If you want the safety of insurance, because insurance is a hedge, it's a financial hedge. If you want the safety of insurance, buy whole life insurance, because it's guaranteed. The thing will not implode on itself ever. So you kind of have to decide what you want. Don't try to mix two different competing concepts together in an insurance product. I'm not saying that IUL can't work. I'm not even saying that the product won't perform well. If you fund an IUL well and you buy it from a reputable company, and a company that the company doesn't have a history of kind of screwing its policyholders, then the product should theoretically perform. It should be a strong performer. But strong performance means it's going to do comparable to what a fixed life insurance product does. And you shouldn't be expecting this thing to perform like a VUL, a variable life insurance, or like an index fund or something like that. You shouldn't expect that. So in my mind, if you want to invest in an index fund, invest in an index fund, right? Don't invest in an IUL thinking or buy an IUL thinking it's going to act like an indexed fund. If you want the safety of a life insurance product and you're buying, it's like, hey, this is my safe money, use whole life insurance. That's what it's there for. That's what it's designed for. It's sort of IUL, in my mind, in my personal opinion, IUL is sort of this product that doesn't have a home. It doesn't have a real market. It has marketing, but it doesn't really have a market. And so it's whole life, it's term insurance, or if you want to go higher on the risk spectrum, dive headlong into equities. All right, I hope that helps, and I will see you in the next one.
Okay, that's it for this week's question. If you'd like to add your question to the list, just drop them in the comment section or send me an email. And if you want more life insurance tips and advice, just head on over to monogenics.com, monegeniX.com, and sign up for my daily email list.